I want to thank Morton Klein for being the person that he is and his efforts to maintain Israel's sovereignty. Morton Klein, for those of you who are unaware, is the national president of the Zionist Organization of America, the oldest pro-Israel group, founded in 1897. Ordinarily, I can just memorize all this stuff and read it, but with a man so accomplished, I have to write it down. He's a member of the National Council of AIPAC. He is one of the leading Jewish activists in the United States, a member of the International Board of Governors of the College of Judea and Samaria in Ariel, Israel. He's an economist by trade. He served in the Nixon, Ford, and Carter administrations. He worked closely with two-time Nobel laureate Linus Pauling. He's lectured at Temple University. The Wall Street Journal called the Zionist Organization of America, quote, heroic and the most credible advocate for Israel on the American Jewish scene today. They went on to describe Morton as wise, brave, and unflinchingly honest. When the history of the American Jewish struggle in these years is written, Mr. Klein will emerge as an outsized figure. He has been invited to testify before the U.S. Congress, including the House International Relations Committee and also the Israeli Knesset. Mr. Klein is routinely sought out as an expert by major network news media. He is willing to share his expertise with the public, and we are fortunate to have him here for us tonight. Please welcome Morton Klein, joined by his wife, Rita.
Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction. I'm glad you read it exactly the way my mother wrote it for you. Thank you. I also want to, I have to thank Mark Christian and the Blanks and Vicky and others who do such holy work in defense of the holy Jewish nation of Eretz Yisrael. I have to say, I've only been here for 24 hours. I got here late yesterday with my wife, Rita. We've already met a number of I have President Ohama on my mind, obviously. And the Omaha people I've met have been so nice, truly. It's so kind and so pleasant. Unlike some of the people we meet on the East Coast where I'm from, that my wife has decided to spend tomorrow to find a condominium and not go home. Also, before I begin my remarks, my wife has instructed me before my talks to make sure the audience understands. You hear those sounds. Unfortunately, I have Tourette syndrome. It's a neurochemical disorder. Forces me to make sounds unfortunately I can't control. I have some facial tics that I can't help. But I don't have the worst kind. The worst kind of Tourette is where people actually curse for no reason whatsoever. But I want everyone to know that every time I curse, it's for a damn good reason. And that's because of my condition. The first woman who showed any interest in marrying me, I married immediately. I don't want to take any chances of being alone. And that was Rita. Well, I'm forced to say something about what's been going on this week. Did anyone here in the room hear that there was an Israeli election this week? Yes? Prime Minister Netanyahu won an extraordinary victory. In 2012, he had 18 seats in the Knesset. This time, he won 30 seats in the Knesset. Over 60% of the Jewish voters in Israel voted for the conservative parties, over 60%. You see, the Jews in Israel are different from the Jews in America because they live in a place where God dwells, and God is a conservative. Just read the Bible. And I'm so proud of all of the Christian Zionists here. You are the greatest supporters of the Jewish state of any people in America, frankly, greater than most Jews, because you people believe in the Bible. You people believe in the Bible, as I do. I'm so proud that the Israelis chose reality and security over fantasy and appeasement, because that's what the other side was promising. They chose a united city of Jerusalem. They chose of the right of Jews to live in Judea and Samaria, and they chose to reject the establishment of a Hamas, Iran, Palestinian terrorist dictatorship. That's what it'll be, just like Gaza, and we all know it. Remarkably, the Israeli people rejected, unlike the American people, they rejected hope and change. And it's really extraordinary, despite the fact that President Obama sent his top campaign aides to Israel, unprecedented almost in situation, to fight against Netanyahu. He had his State Department give $350,000 to the group to fight Netanyahu. It's now going to be investigated as to whether this is legal. He showed overt public antagonism toward Netanyahu. And despite this, Prime Minister Netanyahu won and President Obama lost. And let me tell you something. I believe President Obama helped Netanyahu. Why? Because the Israelis saw they cannot depend on the Obama administration to defend Israel at a time of any future security need. They saw in the Hamas war against Israel only last summer. And remember, if Hamas didn't launch 5,000 rockets to civilian areas of Israel, Israel would never have invaded Gaza. Hamas forced this war. Hamas caused this war. Hamas caused every single casualty in the war is in the hands of Hamas. They started the war. Israel was forced to defend themselves. If we had missiles coming from Mexico or Canada, what would we do? We'd go in there and wipe those suckers out. That was my Tourette speaking. That wasn't me. That wasn't me. So I saw Obama not give Israel ammunition during this war when they needed it. They saw him constantly criticizing Israel. They saw Obama demanding after 1 week to have a ceasefire under Hamas terms. And Israel actually agreed, and Hamas refused. They see his work toward Iran, with respect to Iran, where he's building a pathway, I'll talk about that in a second, to Iran getting nuclear weapons, that he's not serious about stopping them. So the Israelis were forced to turn to the strongest and most experienced security person that they can depend on in Israel. That person was Benjamin Netanyahu, not Isaac Herzog and Tzipi Livni. And you know, he got a lot of flack, Netanyahu. He's been a friend of mine for 21 years. I know him very well. His father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, a professor of history here in the States for many, many years, was a personal friend of mine. I spoke to his father almost every single week and visited him in Israel many, many times. He got flack for saying that he cannot support establishing a state in Judea and Samaria and Gaza and Eastern Jerusalem. And people said, how dare you change your mind? No. He didn't change his mind. Let me tell you what happened. In 2009, Netanyahu did say he supports a state with conditions that people forget about. The conditions was Israel, the Palestinian Authority must publicly recognize Israel as a state of the Jewish people. They refuse. That they must be demilitarized. They refuse. That they must not be allowed to have missiles or rockets on hand. And with Hamas joining them, there are lots of missiles and rockets. So they violated that. They can't have control over airspace. They said they refuse. Israel said there must be defensible borders that we just saw. They demanded go to the 67 line, which is not defensible. And Netanyahu said, and we will not allow a state unless there's an undivided Jerusalem controlled by the holy Jewish state of Israel. And they refuse. So they have violated every single condition over not a month or a year, over 6 years. So Netanyahu finally said, they violated my conditions for 6 years now. I don't see any reason to believe that they'll change anytime in the near future. That's why he said we can't accept a Hamas, Iran, Palestinian Authority, terrorist regime, a dictatorship in their midst. That's why it was not a changing of the mind whatsoever. You know, ZOA, my organization, was the only major Jewish group to publicly criticize President Obama for refusing to join the rally in France against jihadist Islamic terrorism. What a disgrace! What a disgrace! The greatest scourge that threatens not only Israel, but America and the world and Europe and South America, the entire world, since the Nazis, and he refused to go. But maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. Maybe, you know, he said nobody told him about it, he didn't know about it, he was watching a football game, who knows? Of course, if the Nebraska Cornhuskers were playing football that day, I'd understand why he wouldn't go. Maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Let's not forget, for 20 years, President Obama went to Reverend Jeremiah's church in Chicago, a man who had sermons condemning Israel, America, whites, and Jews for 20 years. And President Obama said, this man, Jeremiah Wright, was a great man, that's his words, and my mentor. His children were christened by Jeremiah Wright. He and his wife were married by Jeremiah Wright. He was very close to them. And by the way, you might be surprised to know, I went to high school with Jeremiah Wright. Yes, he is a Philadelphian, went to Central High School, which was the academic high school for serious kids. I was one of the few that weren't serious, but I was there. His father was a very wealthy pastor of a huge church. His mother was the vice principal of the distinguished high school for girls in Philadelphia. So he came from an upper middle class educated family. And so when President Obama said, you have to understand this man was deprived, discriminated against, was economically deprived, it was completely false. I went to high school with him. I knew about him and his background. I wrote about it in New Republic, by the way. But what else should we remember about President Obama to understand why he's acting the way he's had for 6 years to this minute? He's refused, of course, we know, to even use the term Islamic jihadist terrorism. He has ordered all official military and government documents to delete and never use the term Islamic terrorism, jihad, or Islamist. It's nowhere to be found in government documents because of him. In his first major foreign affairs speech, he invited the mother of all Islamic terrorists, the Muslim Brotherhood, to come to a speech in Cairo. President Mubarak begged him not to invite them. This is a terrorist group. They're the mother of Hamas and Hezbollah. And that he has outlawed them, Mubarak said. And if you invite them, I won't come, said the president of Egypt. Instead, President Obama invited them, spoke at the Muslim Brotherhood University, and saved the first 3 rows for them, even though Mubarak begged them not to. And although he publicly, listen to this, he publicly supported the rallies to get rid of Mubarak. You remember that. Mr. Mubarak, get out of here. We don't want you. The people don't want you. Get out. When Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, this vicious, vicious man, when there were rallies at this similar time, hundreds of thousands of Iranians demanding that Ahmadinejad go, people were begging President Obama to speak out and support those people. What did President Obama do? He said, it's not our business. It's an internal matter, and the U.S. should not meddle in internal matters. He said that publicly. What does that tell you? Our ally, who's not, he's a terrible dictator, but not a radical extremist, the way Ahmadinejad is, wants to get him out. The Muslim Brotherhood he invites in and praises them. Ahmadinejad he lets in. And this past few months, he has meddled in the internal election of the country of Israel. So when it comes to people who are our allies, like Mubarak and Netanyahu, he fights against them. Radical, vicious radicals like Ahmadinejad, nothing. President Obama has released numerous Islamic terrorists from Guantanamo prison who were officially designated as high risk to become terrorists again, and many of them have. He has invited, I don't know if you know this, Muslim Brotherhood members regularly to the White House and National Security Council. How do I know this? Because when I've met with the National Security Council, they tell me the brothers are here regularly. They tell me this openly. They call them the brothers, the Muslim Brotherhood. He invites this vicious terrorist group to come to Washington regularly. He has pressured Israel relentlessly to make one-sided concessions, but never pressured the terrorist-promoting dictator Abbas to do so. And listen to this. Even during his campaign for president in 2008, the New York Times reported, May 16th, 2008, look it up, that President Obama publicly said, we have to recognize, quote, the legitimate claims of Hezbollah and Hamas. An exact quote from the New York Times, I'm not making this up. He said it in the campaign, just ignored by America. It's just quite shocking. And the meeting that I had with others, heads of Jewish organizations, he said to us, is Israel really serious about peace? He said, are you Jewish leaders really serious about peace? You Jewish leaders must talk to your Israeli friends and relatives and ask them, and I ask you, he said to us, to search your souls to see if you're serious about peace. I don't think you are. But Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority, he said to us, is very sincere about peace. Is that shocking? That's not hearsay. I was sitting 5 seats away from President Obama when he said this. And so I will say, as others will not, why does President Obama seem to be more sympathetic to radical Muslim terrorists and the groups of radical Muslim terrorists than he is to the victims of radical Muslim terrorists? Why? It's a painful question to ask, but the evidence requires me to ask that question. I can't come tragically to any other conclusion. The Iran issue is a very serious issue. It's existential to Israel. But we're in danger too here in America. Even during negotiations that have been going on for quite a while now, Iran's top leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, I won't call him the supreme leader, because the only supreme I know is headed by Diana Ross. They're the only supremes I know. And I like her very much. I don't like Khamenei. I have every one of the Supremes albums. I'm glad they stopped making them. I couldn't afford it anymore. It's enough albums already. He made speeches publicly. During negotiations, Israel's a dirty rabid dog. Jews are not human, they're animals. Israel's an illegitimate bastard state. Israel is doomed to extinction and annihilation. Okay, it's Israel. What does he say during negotiations about America? Anywhere there's an Islamic anti-U.S. movement, we support it. The U.S. is an enemy who smiles. The U.S. is evil. The U.S. is the great Satan. Iran's defense ministry, and I asked Prime Minister Netanyahu to mention this, he didn't. In November of last year, put out a report, quote, that the title, the U.S. is the #1 enemy of the Islamic Revolution and of the state of Iran. They put out that report. We are the number one enemy. Their moderate, so-called moderate President Rouhani was indicted for being the planner of the massacre of 85 people at a community center in Argentina. He was the leader of murdering 19 Marines in the Kobar Towers. And he made a speech recently saying, because they have rallies repeatedly saying death to America. And he said, saying death to America is easy. We need to express death to America with action, not simply with words. This is the moderate Rouhani saying this during negotiations. And you don't hear any criticism from the administration with these vicious, terrible statements. When John Kerry was asked about all these statements in the last few months, do you know what his answer was? Yes, this is not helpful to getting a real agreement. Not helpful? I'm not helpful around the house, but this is worse than not helpful. We are ignoring that they're the biggest supporter of terrorism in the world, funding and arming Hamas, Hezbollah, and Assad. We're ignoring their human rights abuses, thousands of political prisoners, thousands of people murdered, killed because they're against the regime. They stone women to death. They have outlawed 120 newspapers. Journalists are in prison when they write against them. Gay people are executed regularly. This is the way they act without nuclear weapons. Imagine how they'll act with nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen. We can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. UN resolutions over the last decade have called for them to get rid of all centrifuges and uranium. This new deal is going to allow them to have 9,000 centrifuges. Why? Going to allow them to have uranium, which is now enriched to 20%, down to 5%. But that can be reversed quickly to make it of weapon grade. I know this. I used to work with the greatest physical chemist who ever lived, Professor Linus Pauling, a two-time Nobel laureate. We discussed these issues of nuclear weapons. He was very interested in it. He received the Nobel Peace Prize for his fight against nuclear weapons. So it can be, in a few weeks, it can be reverted back to how they can make weapons. They say they need it for energy. 17 countries have nuclear energy without enriching uranium. It's a lie. They don't need it. There's only one purpose to it, that's to make nuclear weapons, and we're not forcing them to get rid of it, throw it into the sea, destroy it. We're not doing it. We're ignoring the fact that they're building ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. They don't need that to attack Israel. They can attack Israel with conventional missiles. Why are they building intercontinental missiles? Why is it called intercontinental? So it can go from one continent to another. That's why it's called intercontinental. I looked it up exactly what it meant. So I never studied hard in high school. I didn't learn these things. Because they want to be able to reach America. And there's only one purpose for these ICBMs, one only, to carry nuclear weapons. They have no other purpose, and we're ignoring it. They're building them. In fact, information tells us this year they're going to be able to have ICBMs to reach America. That's the great Satan, ladies and gentlemen. That's us. Even if there is no Israel, we have to worry very deeply about the Iran nuclear weapons program and their interest. And this plan has been leaked, has a sunset clause. In 10 years, all restrictions are off. Can you imagine? So in 10 years, they'll build nuclear weapons. What the hell kind of a deal is this? It's just totally absurd. And of course, sanctions were dropped. Senator Menendez, the former chairman of Foreign Relations, now ranking member from New Jersey, a Democrat, said, quote, "The more I hear from the administration in its quotes, the more it sounds like talking points that are coming straight from Iran." That's Senator Menendez. A week after he said this, the Justice Department said they're going to prosecute him for corruption. A week after he said this. I happen to know they pressured Israel into not hitting Iran militarily in 2012. And if they believed there was real serious interest in military action, this would stop them. But if you just say all options are on the table. That's not enough. You got to say the military options on the table. And if you continue in this program, we're going to hit you militarily. Do you know in 2003, when George Bush hit Iraq, Iran stopped working on nuclear weapons for over a year. They became frightened that they get hit next. A credible military option is a way to frighten them, and they have to know we are serious. Now they know they're not. They're going to keep moving forward and forward. This is a big mistake this administration is doing. And also, do you notice that he says, I'm not going to allow a vote of the Senate. Our Constitution, remember the Constitution we used to follow once in a while? Our Constitution says any treaty must be confirmed by 2/3 of the Senate. I looked up the word treaty. It says this is an agreement between the United States and another country. Well, I think this Iran nuclear deal, which is so serious, is a treaty. It requires a 2/3 vote. Obama says, I'm going to veto it. If you pass a law, the law's already there in the Constitution, we don't need it. I'm not going to allow a vote. He says just a private agreement. Well, if this is going to be, ladies and gentlemen, a good deal that protects us from New York to Nebraska to California, why doesn't he allow a vote? If it's a good deal, the Senate will say yes in 2 seconds. The proof this is a lousy deal, he won't allow a vote. What more proof do you need? The New York Times, March 8th, that's fairly recent, I think, of this year, said they've uncovered a hidden world of labs and sprawling factories, some ringed by barbed wire and anti-aircraft guns, camouflaging, burying deep underground their program. This is what Iran won't say about the bomb. New York Times. I mean, it's so clear they're working on nuclear weapons, and not only are we not working for a serious deal, he's defending Iran. He's saying, I don't want any more sanctions. I don't want a vote. He actually celebrated their holiday last week, Nowruz, N-O-W-R-U-Z, celebrating the Iranian holiday, appeasing them more. You know, why are we celebrating the Iranian holiday? So this is a very serious issue that could cause the most astonishing number of deaths in the world since the Holocaust. So you must get in touch with your senators here, your members of Congress, to fight like hell to make sure that a 2/3 vote is going to be there if, in fact, it's a decent deal. We cannot allow President Obama to unilaterally make a decision about something that affects all of us in such a serious way. Let your Congress people know. Iran must be stopped from obtaining nuclear weapons. It's the duty of the whole world. As Ms. Gross was talking to us about the horrors of the Holocaust, and by the way, I'm a child of survivors. I was born in the displaced persons camp in Germany. My father was in Auschwitz himself, and he dealt with Mengele. And my mother was in Siberia. My father lost his entire family, 8 brothers and sisters, his first family, grandparents, everybody, aunts, uncles. So it's the duty of the whole world to realize the memory of the Holocaust goes beyond holding memorial services, goes beyond having museums, goes beyond having a recollection of these horrors. The memory of the Holocaust obligates us to apply the lessons of the past to ensure our future. We dare not bury our heads in the sand when you have the new Nazis developing nuclear weapons that kill all the infidels. We dare not. We dare not. We dare not. Even though you may think that my little remarks about Iran sound very similar to Prime Minister Netanyahu's, I want you to know I did not write his speech. And I wrote this before Netanyahu delivered that. This is my own. Then when he said all the same things I was saying, I said, my God, what did he get a copy of this? Someone leaked this? So that was my preface to my talk. And I know all of you can't wait to spend another hour or two to hear more of what I want to say, because it's so delightful and pleasant. It only makes your day, makes you feel much more confident about the world, doesn't it? But as Winston Churchill said, and we have to live by this dictum, he said, we must look at the facts because the facts are looking at us. It's one of his famous phrases. In other words, whether we look at them or not, whether we ignore them or not, they're there. And if we ignore them, they're going to be there, and the consequences will be there whether we like it or not. We must look at these terrible facts, and there's still time to prevent this terrible problem. I want to say a few words about the Orwellian lies against Israel. First, the most shocking is the issue of Jerusalem. One of the greatest propaganda myths and Orwellian lies about Jerusalem is that Jerusalem is holy to Muslims. It is not. If it was, we have to deal with that. I would deal with that. It's a huge lie. Jerusalem was the capital of Israel under King David 3,000 years ago. It has never been the capital of any other nation except Israel. When the Arabs conquered Palestine in 716 CE, did they make Jerusalem their capital? They made Ramla their capital. Everyone knew this was the Jewish city. Even the Arabs then. Our holiest places are in eastern Jerusalem. You notice the Temple Mount, which is the holiest place in Judaism where Jesus spoke? Do you notice it's not called the Mosque Mount? It's not called the Mosque Mount, is it? It's the Temple Mount. And the Arabs, the Muslims, built their mosque on top of where the original Jewish temple existed to show superiority. You always read in the paper how Jerusalem is the third holiest place, city for the Muslims. Mecca and Medina are first. Why don't you ever read that Jerusalem is the first holiest place for the Jews? First. How come they get their top three, we don't even get the first? Sounds like a bad trade of one of my managers in the Philadelphia Phillies or the Philadelphia Eagles. They get their first three, we get nothing. And the majority, listen to this, the majority of the people living in Yerushalayim and Jerusalem since the first census in 1850 have been Jews. Can you imagine that? Been Jews. The majority of people living there has been Jews. I have a textbook, a travel guide from 1906, Bedeker's. There's a reason I have it. I won't get into it. 1906 travel guide to Jerusalem says there were 60,000 people in Jerusalem in 1906. 7,000 Muslims, 13,000 Christians, 40,000 Jews. 1906. This has been a holy city to the Jews forever. The Muslims never built an important place of learning. In the Jewish holy books, Jerusalem is mentioned 700 times. Yom Kippur and Passover, we end it by saying next year in Jerusalem. How many times is the word Jerusalem, a famous city when the Quran was written, how many times is it in the Quran? 0. It's not written there. How can it be that the most famous city that's so holy is not in the Quran if it's so holy to them? For God's sakes. How did they get away with this? You know, the PLO Covenant in 1964 does all sorts of terrible things, doesn't even mention Jerusalem. Doesn't even mention it. The Jews face Jerusalem when they daven, when they pray. The Muslims, they face Mecca. From 48 to 67, when the Arabs controlled all of eastern Jerusalem, which is the real Jerusalem, western Jerusalem is new, did they make it a fancy, wonderful place? They allowed it to be a slum. There was virtually no water, electricity, or plumbing. There were 58 synagogues in what they call, falsely, Arab East Jerusalem. They dynamited every one of the synagogues to erase a trace of Jews being there. They destroyed the Mount of Olives Cemetery, the Arabs did, the oldest and largest Jewish cemetery in the world. Jews and Christians weren't allowed to visit the holy places. No Arab leader visited Jerusalem. If it's so holy, no Arab leader from 4867 visited. King Hussein a couple of times, the king of Jordan. It meant nothing to them. So if it's not holy to them, it's not enough for them to say so. You know, one rabbi, when I gave a speech, the entire speech about Jews, said, you can't tell the Muslims what's holy to them. They decide that. I said, if there's no basis for their saying it. We can't accept it. I said, suppose they say Los Angeles is holy to them. We have to give them half Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, and Bel Air? I mean, yeah, they can have Beverly Hills and Bel Air. We'll keep Jerusalem. We'll keep Jerusalem. Let them have Beverly Hills and Bel Air. So it's ridiculous. Another myth, another Orwellian lie, the occupation. You hear about this incessantly, including in the last week or two. To end the occupation. Ladies and gentlemen, is there really an occupation? The Israelis have given away, unilaterally, all of Gaza, 42% of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. That's where 99% of the Arabs live. 2% of all the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, only 2% of it is where the Jews live. Do you know that? Not 57% as the image is, that they have control everything. 2%. Most of it is uninhabited. And the Palestinian Arabs live under their own autonomy. There is no occupation. It's a lie. They have their own parliament they vote for, their own schools, their own textbooks, their own newspapers, their own radio stations, TV stations, businesses, their own police force. They run their own lives except security. The Israeli soldiers are there for one reason. There's constant terror cells evolving to get into Israel and murder Jews. And the reason there's been a dramatic drop in terrorism is because the Israeli soldiers are there, finding the terror cells and the terrorists, capturing them and arresting them before it happens. They're in there every single night. People don't realize this or know this. It's not really reported. If there was no terrorism, there'd be no Israeli soldiers in Judea and Samaria. They don't want to be there. They have to be there to protect their citizens. Checkpoints are there because there's continuous terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, we have checkpoints that I just experienced yesterday in our airports. Long lines, they check us, take off your shoes, take off your shirt, take off your undershirt, take off your watch, take everything off. It's one of the reasons I hang around there. I keep watching, maybe someone will take everything off. They get confused. I'll just take everything off. Stop yelling at me, all right? The socks too, not the socks. I keep the socks, all right? If there was no terrorism threats, there'd be no checkpoints at airports. The same as in Israel. Nobody wants these checkpoints. We have to have them to protect our people. So there really is no occupation. And let me show you this. This is a map of the Middle East. The orange are the 22 Arab countries. This is Iran. They're a Muslim country, but they're not Arab. You see the yellow? That's Israel. And that includes Gaza and Judea and Samaria, when Israel's given away chunks of that. The Arab world is 800 times the size of Israel. 800 times. Israel is 1/8 of 1% of the landmass. And the whole world is saying, I know how to get to peace. Land for peace. Land for peace? Who's given up the land? It's ridiculous. Imagine if there were 22 Jewish countries and a little Arab country. Would the world be saying to the Jews and the world be saying to the Arabs, give away more of that little tiny land and give a 23rd country to the Jews? They'd say, don't be ridiculous. The Arabs have nothing. Leave them alone. That's the situation we deal with. And then others about the settlements, which are Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. They're real cities. They're not tents. They're real cities with schools and libraries and businesses. You always read in the paper today that most of the world considers them illegal. They're illegal. Illegal means the Jews are building on the sovereign Arab land. Another propaganda lie. From 1917 to 48, the British legally controlled Palestine. From 1748, Jordan controlled all of this. That was Palestine. In 1922, they gave 80% of original Palestine away to Transjordan, became Jordan later. So of original Palestine, there's only 20% left. Right? You see that's the shape of Israel. That's all that's left. In 1947, they offered to divide essentially in half the rest of Palestine. Half would go to Arabs, half to Jews. And as we know, the Arabs launched a war. They refused to accept it. to try and destroy the fledgling state. In 48, when the United Nations split that rest of Palestine in half, the Arabs said no, and they invaded Israel trying to destroy it. Only because there's a God in heaven did they fail. Only because there's a God in heaven did they fail. These were Holocaust survivors, people who just went through hell. They had very little arms. 6 Arab armies invaded, and they won. I mean, do you need more of a reason to believe there's a God on this earth? And so when they said no, they gave up sovereignty over that area. Jordan illegally seized it during the war. Only 2 states recognized the Jordan seizure. So this is unallocated land under international law. It's no one's sovereign land. They were offered it. They said no. It's not theirs. It's not. I offer my house for $200,000 to someone. Someone says, maybe I'll do it, but they don't do it. So it's not theirs. I pull it back. It's not theirs. They have to accept it. This is unallocated Jewish land. And in 1988, King Hussein publicly relinquished any claim to it. So it's no one's sovereign land. This is ridiculous. In the 67 Arab War against Israel, where Israel begged King Hussein not to enter the war, Hussein entered, and Israel in self-defense captured Judea and Samaria from Jordan. After the war, Israel offered all of Gaza, the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, Sinai, and the Golan Heights to the Arabs for a peace deal. The Arabs said no peace, no negotiation, no recognition. They could have had it all. They said, no, we're not going to make peace with Israel. The PLO covenant, which I have here, says the PLO does not exercise any territorial sovereignty over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. Its activities are on the national popular level in the liberational, organizational, political, financial fields. Article 24 of the PLO Covenant. They say it's not our sovereign land. So Israel has a greater legal, religious, historical, and political right to those lands. It is perfectly legal for Jews to live and to build in Judea and Samaria, much less so for the Arabs who are building at 10 times the rate. And by the way, there's been not a single new Jewish community built in Judea and Samaria since the Oslo Agreements were signed in 93. All the building you hear about, and believe me, it's not very much. Netanyahu has built less than any previous prime minister, less. All the new building are within the boundaries of the existing communities that were there in 93. Not a single new settlement has been built. You may hear that the Fourth Geneva Convention, Article 49, says that it's illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention. What does Article 49 say? That no country can force individuals to be transfer their population to a sovereign territory. They can't force individuals to go into a sovereign territory. Israel never forced the Jews to move there. They moved there on their own, and it's no one's sovereign territory. So Article 49 does not work here. It's utter rubbish. It's just those who hate Israel promote this kind of nonsense. And you people need to know this. Tell this to your members of the House and Senate. Tell this to your friends and relatives. It's perfectly legal. In fact, when Abbas talks about that this is Arab land, he says Hebron is Arab land. That was in Genesis number 23. He says Bethlehem's is Arab land. Genesis 35 says Jericho, Joshua 5. They burned down the tomb of Joseph, saying it's theirs anyway, Joshua 24. But both Christian scriptures, Matthew 1, and the Jewish Torah, calls these lands Judea. The Arabs call it the West Bank because it would be ridiculous for the Arabs to say Judea is our holy original Arab land. We Jews are called Jews because we're from Judea. We are Judeans. Jew is a contraction of the word Judean. We're the indigenous people of this land, not the Arabs. They're from Arabia. The Jews are from Judea. And is Abbas a moderate? Abbas says no Jew will be allowed to live in any future Palestinian state. That's moderate. He glorifies Jew-killing terrorists with parades and speeches and posters. Do you know this? He pays pensions to the families of suicide bombers, to the families of terrorists who are in Israeli prisons. He pays them pensions, promoting the murder of Jews. And listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. The more Jews they have killed, the higher their pension. Can you believe this? They get rewarded for killing more Jews. Today, this isn't 1940 in Germany. Today, and our media does not tell you these terrible, terrible things. And a horrible thing happened a few months ago. When Hamas aligned themselves with the Palestinian Authority. Hamas, a terrorist group whose existing charter calls for not only the destruction of Israel, it calls for the murder of every Jew, Article 7. The murder of every Jew is a Nazi document. When they merged with the Palestinian Authority, the whole world, including our president, was silent. This was a diplomatic Kristallnacht. When they were murdering Jews and destroying their synagogues and businesses in 1938 in Kristallnacht, the world was silent. And now, when they merged with a Nazi-like regime, again, the world is silent. This was a diplomatic Kristallnacht. It's very, very, very frightening. To the Palestinian Authority, they're screaming about Netanyahu not accepting a state. This is Mahmoud Abbas's new emblem for the Fatah party, his ruling party. Do you notice the Arab keffiyeh in the shape of all of Israel? You notice that? In the shape of all of Israel. Not just all of Judea and Samaria, half of Jerusalem, Gaza, all Judea and Samaria, all of Israel. A Kalashnikov rifle promoting terrorism, and a picture of their hero, the arch-terrorist of our time, Yasser Arafat. Is this the emblem that you commission if you want to make peace with the Jewish state and support that Israel has a right to have a state too? Hardly. What more proof does he have to give us? And yet, you see very few people talking about this. By the way, if you go in the Arab market, you see lots of things like this. Keffiyehs. And you see what's on there? A shape of all of Israel is Palestine. This is very common. That's sold all over the Arab markets. I've seen many, many of these. I just thought I would show it to you. And every time an Arab kills Jews and it dies, either suicide bombing or some other way, they create a poster like this one. This is one of the terrorists, calling him our hero, our martyr. This is a poster of one of the killers. 2 Egged Israeli buses being blown up. There's fire being blown up. That's a Jewish star breaking apart with blood coming through with skeletons. They honor every suicide bomber by putting these posters up all over their schools to show that these are our heroes. Emulate them. Live like these terrorists. Can you imagine having posters of Charlie Manson over our schools? Or O.J. Simpson over us? Oh, no, he was innocent. He was innocent. I'm sorry. My mistake. I mean, it's ridiculous. He named schools, streets, and sports teams after terrorists. Schools, streets, and sports teams are named after terrorists, glorifying them. And he does many other things promoting hatred and violence against Jews. I don't have time to get into it. I will not get into it. But you should know that all their polls show between 60 and 90% of the Palestinian Arabs do not accept Israel, 60 to 90, and support suicide bombings. Overwhelming numbers in these polls. You never see this. On TV, they have beautiful little Arab children being interviewed saying things like, what could be better than going to paradise? They're talking about suicide bombing. These children are taught what an honorable thing it is to kill yourself in order to kill Jews, because you go to paradise. Now, the boys are excited they'll get 72 virgins. The girls say, we want somebody experienced. That's not me talking. It's my Tourette. I say things, I don't know what I'm saying. Don't know what I'm saying. And finally, you hear it every second. This week, mostly. How do we solve it? It's simple. Give them a Palestinian state. Give them a state and everything is resolved. Let me tell you something shocking, ladies and gentlemen. The Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Arabs, you ready for this? Do not want a state. They don't want a state if it means accepting Israel. They'll take it for free. Give me more land. They were offered a state in 1937. I'm proving it to you. The Peel Commission. They were going to get 95% of the rest of Palestine. Remember, Jordan has 80%. The Jews 5%. The Arabs said no. 1948, we talked about splitting the rest of it in half. They went to war. They said no. In 2000, Prime Minister Ehud Barak offered them a state on 95% of Judea and Samaria, chunks of Jerusalem. Arafat started a terror war and murdered thousands of Jews and maimed 10,000 more. 2007-8, Olmert offered a state on 98% of Judea and Samaria, half of Jerusalem, to Mahmoud Abbas. I asked Olmert, well, what did he say when you offered this to him? Because I was writing articles condemning Olmert for this offer. He said, Mort, he never got back to me. So he was offered, how much more, if you're in a negotiating situation, you get 98% of what you want. Do you say, I want 100%? They don't want to stay because, you see, signing that deal, why wouldn't they accept it? Meant signing a clause that says, no further claims. The war's over. And you accept Israel as a Jewish state. They won't sign that because their goal is the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel, not to have their own Palestinian state. And they could have had it from 48 to 67. They controlled all of Judea and Samaria, all of Gaza, half of Jerusalem, the Golan, the Sinai. Did they create a state when they controlled it? No, they didn't create a state because that's not their interest. Stop fooling ourselves that statehood is the answer. It is a rubbish line. Plus, I want to stop hearing this term two-state solution. Why? Because it's a fake term. Israel's already a state. It's a Palestinian state solution, which is no solution. By saying two-state solution, it sounds like both sides are getting something. It sounds like Israel's not really a state yet. It's a terrible term that we accept and we should never allow. Giving them a state, we tell members of the House and Senate, will only strengthen the underlying culture to promote their vicious agenda. Be a terrible, terrible mistake. Syria has a state. Iran has a state. North Korea has a state. Are they lovely? Are we glad they have sovereignty? Statehood doesn't do it if your underlying culture is evil, which it is. So I'll end by simply saying, we must tell our members of the House and Senate, stop appeasing the Palestinian Authority, stop giving them $600 million a year, ladies and gentlemen, of our money. Can you imagine? $600 million. Stop the money now. Move the American embassy to Jerusalem as a law passed in 1996 or 7, I can't even remember, 95, requires, and every president, Clinton, Bush, and Obama have all invoked a security clause saying it would be too dangerous, and they don't move it. We should demand it be moved. And we should be telling people all of these things. There's a story about Winston Churchill and Lady Astor. After the Munich Agreement with Chamberlain, Churchill went around saying, this is a disaster, it's going to lead to war, it's horrible. Lady Astor, who was a member of Parliament, went over to Churchill and said, I'm so angry at you, Winston. Getting people upset when we have peace at hand now with the Germans. She said, if I was your wife, Winston, I would put poison in your tea. And he said, and if I were your husband, Lady Astor, I would drink it. Was this guy quick-witted or what? Whenever I have something like that said to me, I just start, I don't know what to say. And let me tell you, one of the things when we deal with Muslims in our own community and deal with leaders of mosques, when they want to have a dialogue and discuss these issues, we say to them, you must do a number of these or all of these. You must publicly or in writing accept Israel as a Jewish state. You must condemn publicly the Palestinians for joining up with Hamas. You must condemn the PA and Hamas by name for promoting the murder of Jewish people. You must condemn them in writing or publicly for naming schools, streets, and sports teams after terrorists. You must accept that the Temple Mount is Judaism's holiest place because the holy Jewish temples were built there. You must acknowledge this is an Arab war against Israel. It is not an Arab-Israeli conflict. The conflict would have been over. The Arabs don't want it to be over. It's an Arab war against Israel. You have to say that. You must acknowledge the right of Jews to live in Judea and Samaria. Why not? If 1.5 million Arabs can live in Israel, why can't 350,000 Jews live in Judea and Samaria? What kind of racism is that? You must accept, reject the demand that so-called Arab refugees be allowed to move into Israel. You must criticize the Palestinian Authority publicly for refusing to accept the 2000-2007 offers of statehood. You must condemn the PA emblem that I just showed you. You must condemn the pensions being paid in writing. You must condemn Abbas for being a dictator. Abbas has not had an election since 2005. He is a vicious dictator. You never heard this administration condemn him for that. But I'm so pleased that Christians and Americans support Israel by 5-1 to 10-1 in every poll. 5-1 to 10-1. By 58 to 17%, they say the PA will be a terrorist state if it's a state. By 47 to 14, Americans support the right of Jews to live in Judea and Samaria. By 59 to 17%, they want stronger Iran sanctions. I'm telling you, I'm getting personally sick and tired of leaders around the world, and here in the U.S., both non-Jewish and Jewish, saying we can have peace in the Middle East. We can end this Arab war against Israel. Just give them a little more land, a little more aid, a little more restraint, a little less building, a little more appeasement. Give them a little state. Let me now state my and Zio's opinion of the truth. The Arabs do not want peace. The Arabs have never wanted peace with the Jews of the Jewish state, and we believe it's likely in the foreseeable future they will never want peace. And let me tell you something else. As much as we all want Israel to have peace with the Arabs, we must understand one thing. The holy Jewish state of Israel can and will survive and thrive even without peace, as Israel has since its reestablishment in 1948. It survived and thrived since 1948 without peace, even though they want peace. And they're willing to make major concessions. And I will truly end by saying, those who support the Jewish state must believe in miracles. Must believe, because we've had extraordinary miracles throughout history. Who would believe that even though Israel was the David and the Arab world was the Goliath, Israel won the wars in 48, 56, 67, 73. A miracle. Who would have believed that Israel, which began with 600,000 Jews in 48, now has 6 million Jews? It's a miracle. As God promised, there'll be an ingathering of the Jews coming back to Eretz Yisrael. And it's happened. God promised it. And God doesn't break his promises. Doesn't break his promises. I say, thank God that God doesn't run for political office. Then those promises will begin to be broken. Who would have believed that Israel would have made the desert bloom, just as the Bible promised? The Holy Land, the Bible says, will remain barren until the Jews return. It's an extraordinary thing to say. Human beings wouldn't write that, because if it was fertile while the Jews were away, that means the Bible is a farce. Only God, who controls history, would say this. And that's just what happened. That is truly a miracle, enough to make you believe in God and try to do all of his commandments and fulfill all of his wishes. Who would have believed that Israel would go from the agrarian economy, become one of the world's leaders in microchips and high-tech areas? Who would have believed that the Jewish state would have more scientists per capita, publish more scientific papers per capita, have more musicians and orchestras per capita than any country in the face of the earth? It's a miracle. And who would believe that the Jewish state would produce over a dozen Nobel laureates, the highest percentage per capita of any country in the world? And listen to this. Who would believe when the Jews went to Gaza and started to farm there? The Arab says, we've been farming here for years. Nothing grows. Don't waste your time in Gaza. It became incredibly fertile. Tremendous fruits and vegetables and plants. It was a miracle. The Arabs couldn't believe it. When the Jews left, when Sharon threw them out, the Arabs took over those farms and greenhouses. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing grows. I mean, is this a miracle? Nothing grows. There is a God in heaven, ladies and gentlemen. And who would believe that for the first time in history, a country would bring black people to its shores, not to be slaves. These are the Ethiopian Jews, but to be a free and proud people. That country is Israel, and we are so proud of that. And finally, who would believe? After 2,000 years of dispersion, there are now 400,000 Jews in the holy city of Jerusalem, 350,000 Jews in the holy land of Yehuda and Shomron, the West Bank, given to the Jewish people by the Lord our God. And after 2,000 years, we have sovereignty over all of historically Jewish Jerusalem, never to be divided again, ladies and gentlemen. For God's sakes, we all call this land the Promised Land. Who promised it, and to whom did he promise it? Do we need to know more? God promised it to the Jews. That's why it's called the Promised Land. So we have to be strong. Be not afraid, for God is with us. The Holy Bible promises that the Jews are an eternal people, never to be destroyed. So it has been, so it will continue to be. And with your help, with the help and strength of the Israeli people, with the strength and the help of the Israel Defense Forces, and with the help of Almighty God, the people of Israel shall dwell in their holy land for eternity. We will prevail as is God's will. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.